It all started in a small, cold village, far away from the bustling cities. A place where people barely spoke to one another, and the cold wind cut through everything. No one ever noticed the children who were born into the world of silence and fear, and no one ever cared about the lives that were traded like objects. Among them was a young girl named Leela. She didn't know what life meant beyond the walls of her cold, dark room. She didn't know what love was, what freedom was, or what it was like to be treated as something more than just a tool. Lila had been born into a world where humans were bought and sold, but she didn't fully understand it at first. Her parents had sold her the moment she was old enough. They had no choice, they said. "It's how we survive," they would say. But Lila never understood what that meant. She was just a child, innocent and unaware of her fate. She never had a name to her own, only a title. Her new owners, the ones who bought her, were not kind. They saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used, a servant. It wasn't long before Lila learned the cruel truth of what she was meant for. They called her a bed warmer. Her job was simple but harsh. Every night she had to lay in their bed, her body providing warmth while they slept soundly. No love, no comfort, just warmth. It was a cold and lonely task, but Lila didn't know anything else. For years, Lila had no real childhood. She wasn't allowed to play, to laugh, or to dream. All she could do was lie in cold beds, staring at the ceiling, wondering why she was even alive. The world outside didn't care about her. She wasn't allowed to speak or to make her own decisions. All she could do was keep warm, keep the bed warm, and wait for the night to end. The family who owned her didn't speak to her unless they needed her. She was not a part of their world. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as something that could be replaced, something that could be traded, something that didn't matter. One evening, as Lila lay in the bed, a cold chill ran down her spine. She had grown used to the cold. She had grown used to the silence, but that night something was different. Something was changing. The house was quieter than usual. The family hadn't spoken to her in hours, and that felt strange. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to ignore it, to just focus on the warmth she was supposed to give, but the feeling wouldn't leave her. Her mind wandered back to when she was a child. She remembered the times when she would run outside, laughing, feeling the sun on her face. Those days seemed like a dream now. The world outside her cold room felt so far away, and she didn't know how to reach it. The days blurred together, and she was trapped in a routine she could not escape. She was a bed warmer, nothing more. But little did Lila know, that very night, something would happen that would change everything. A stranger would appear in her life. Someone who saw her as more than just a tool, someone who didn't see her as something to be used and discarded. This stranger would ask a question that Lila had never dared to think about. What if there was more to life than this? The clock struck midnight, and Lila heard the door creak open. She quickly turned her head, her heart racing. The last thing she expected was someone to enter her room at this hour. But there he stood, a man she had never seen before. He wasn't one of the owners. He wasn't someone from her cold, dark world. He looked at her, not with the usual coldness she was used to, but with sympathy and something more, understanding. "You don't belong here," he said softly, almost as if he was talking to himself. "You shouldn't have to do this." Lila stared at him, confused. Was he real? Was this a dream? But the man didn't disappear. He was there, and he was looking at her as if she mattered. For the first time in years, Lila felt something inside her stir. Was this the answer to the question she had been afraid to ask? Could there be a way out of this life? Could someone actually care about her? The stranger stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can help you," he said. "But you have to trust me." Lila's heart pounded. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone after all these years of pain and loneliness? She had been sold, used, and discarded by everyone. How could she trust this man, a stranger, to save her from a life she knew so well? But in that moment, as she looked into his eyes, Something inside her whispered, "What if he's telling the truth?" Her whole life had been about surviving, about doing what she was told, never questioning, never wondering if there was more. But now, the idea of freedom, the idea of something different, something better, was starting to take root in her heart. This stranger had opened a door, and for the first time in her life, Lila was standing at the threshold of something new, something uncertain, but it was a chance, and that alone was more than she had ever hoped for. The question was no longer about whether she could escape. It was about whether she had the courage to walk through the door. The night felt different now, not just because of the stranger, but because Lila felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Life as a bed warmer. Lila's life was never easy. It never had been. Since the moment she could remember, she had been nothing but a bed warmer. Her world revolved around warmth, her body heating the beds of cruel families who cared nothing for her. The coldness of her surroundings matched the emptiness of her life. She was nothing more than an object, a tool for others to use. Every day felt like the last, like she was stuck in an endless loop of servitude. The nights were the worst. She had to lie still, motionless as the owners slept soundly, her body a source of warmth to their cold, uncaring hearts. Sometimes, she could hear their breathing, slow and steady, as if they had no idea that she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in her thoughts. But there was no escaping it. It was her life, or so she thought. Lila had been passed from one family to the next, traded like an object. The first family that had bought her treated her poorly, using her for warmth during the harshest winters. The father was a cold man, and the mother hardly spoke to her. The children ignored her. Their laughter and games never meant for her. She was just a tool, a means to an end. She had learned quickly that she didn't matter, that no one cared about her. After what felt like a lifetime in that cold house, Lila was sold again. This time, to a different family, one that seemed kinder on the surface. They didn't shout at her or ignore her. They treated her with a strange form of politeness, but it wasn't enough. At night, they still required her warmth. She would lie on their bed, her body used like a heater, her only task to keep them warm through the night. But it was always the same: the silence, the cold, the loneliness. She would often think back to the time when she was a child, before everything changed. She remembered the feeling of the sun on her skin, the soft grass beneath her feet. But those days felt like a distant dream, one she could barely grasp anymore. All she knew now was the cold, the heat of other people's bodies, and the feeling of being invisible. The family she was with now, the Darnells, were wealthier than the others, but it didn't make her life any better. They lived in a large house and their beds were huge. The warmth needed to fill them was more than ever. Lila had learned to bear the cold with patience. She would wait until the house went quiet, and then she would climb into the bed, stretching out her body to fill the cold spaces. There, in that lonely bed, she would stay awake, wishing for something more. One evening, as Lila lay in her usual place, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound: footsteps. The door creaked open, and she held her breath. It wasn't the Darnells. It wasn't one of them. The man from before, the stranger who had looked at her with eyes full of pity, stepped into the room. His presence startled her. She quickly sat up, her heart racing. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice barely a sound in the dark. The man didn't speak immediately. He only looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I told you I would help you," he said softly. "You don't belong here. You don't have to live like this." Lila's heart pounded. Could this really be happening? She had lived her entire life being used for warmth, never questioning the system she had been trapped in. But here was this man, offering her a way out. What do you mean?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "How can you help me? I don't even know you. I'm just a tool for them." The man sighed as if he understood her fear. "You're not a tool," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're a person. And I'm here to help you see that. Lila's mind raced. The idea seemed impossible. She had never been anything other than a bed warmer. To imagine a life without this, without the coldness, without the pain, was unthinkable. But there was a spark inside her, a small flicker of hope that she couldn't ignore. The man stepped closer to her, reaching out a hand. I can take you away from this, he said, but only if you're willing to trust me. Lila looked at his hand, unsure. She had been taught her whole life not to trust anyone. People had only used her. People had only seen her as a tool. But this man, this stranger, had seen something in her that no one had ever seen before. He had seen her as a person, and that in itself made her hesitate. What if I can't leave? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. What if I don't know how? The man smiled. A small, comforting smile. You don't have to know how. You just have to be willing to try. For a long moment, Lila just stared at him. Her heart was pounding, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Could she really leave everything behind? Could she truly escape the life that had been forced upon her? As she sat there staring at the man, something inside her shifted. The coldness that had settled in her heart for so long began to melt away. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was a chance, a tiny spark of hope, for her after all. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a life beyond the cold, beyond the beds, beyond being used. With a trembling hand, Lila reached out to the stranger. I'm ready, she whispered. Lila's heart raced as she took the stranger's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the most important decision of her life. She wasn't sure why she trusted him. After years of being betrayed, used, and discarded, why did this man feel different? Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not as a tool, not as a bed warmer, but as someone who mattered. Maybe it was the flicker of hope he offered, something Lila hadn't felt in years. The stranger didn't say anything as they stood there in the dimly lit room. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. Lila felt a strange sense of calm, though the storm inside her still raged. The thought of leaving everything she had known, even though it was painful, seemed impossible. But the stranger's presence felt like a promise, one that might lead to something better. Where are we going? Lila asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The man's gaze softened. Somewhere far away. Somewhere you can be free. Away from the Darnells, away from everything you've known. I'll protect you. Lila's mind raced. Could she really leave? What if it was a trap? What if she was being tricked into another life of pain and betrayal? But something inside her, the same part that had whispered hope earlier, urged her to trust him. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice. Maybe it was time to take a leap. I've never been free, Lila whispered. I don't know what it feels like. The stranger nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, but I'll show you. You don't have to live this way forever. Lila glanced back at the bed. Her place. Her purpose. The thought of never having to lie there again sent a shiver through her, but it also filled her with a strange sense of relief. She didn't want to go back to that life. Not after this moment. Not after seeing the glimmer of hope in the stranger's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I'm ready, she said, more to herself than to him. She had made up her mind. There was no going back. Without another word, the stranger led her through the dark house. The halls were silent, the only sound being the soft echo of their footsteps. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to scream at her to turn back, to stay in the life she knew, to not risk everything for something unknown. But Lila kept moving forward, the stranger's hand steady in hers, guiding her through the darkness. They reached the back door, and the stranger paused, glancing around to make sure no one was awake. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The Darnells were deep in their sleep, unaware that their bed warmer was leaving them. Lila's breath caught in her throat as the stranger slowly opened the door, the cool night air rushing in. It felt like freedom, like the first breath of fresh air in a lifetime. She could taste it, and it was sweeter than anything she had ever known. "Come on," the stranger whispered, stepping out into the night. "This is the first step." Lila followed him, stepping into the unknown. The darkness of the night swallowed them whole, but it didn't feel scary. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel trapped. She felt like she was breaking free from the chains that had held her for so long. She wasn't just a bed warmer anymore. She was someone with a choice. As they moved away from the house, Lila couldn't help but look back. The large, dark structure loomed behind them, its windows dark and empty. She could almost hear the faint sound of footsteps inside, the soft murmurs of the family sleeping soundly, unaware that she was gone. She was finally free. But the thought still felt foreign to her. Could she really leave it all behind? The stranger led her through the narrow streets, taking quick but steady steps. Lila stayed close behind, her mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. It was as if she had woken up from a long, dark sleep, and now she was seeing the world in a way she never had before. "We'll be far away by morning," the stranger said, his voice calm. "No one will be able to find you." Lila nodded but didn't speak. She wasn't sure what to say. The fear that had been building inside her began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of peace. She had no idea where they were going or what would happen next, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her life. She wasn't just someone's property. She wasn't just a bed warmer. She was a person with a future, with choices. As they continued walking, Lila couldn't help but ask, "Who are you? Why are you helping me?" The stranger paused, glancing at her over his shoulder. For a moment he didn't say anything, but then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "I know what it's like to be trapped, to feel like you have no choices. But I also know that everyone deserves a chance at freedom. You've been treated like an object, but you're not one. I'm here to help you see that." Lila didn't know what to say. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a tool to be used by others. But now the stranger's words were like a spark, a light in the darkness. For the first time in her life, she could see the possibility of something better. She wasn't just a bed warmer. She was someone worthy of freedom, and maybe, just maybe, she could have a life beyond this cold, lonely existence. Lila couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more confusing than the last. The world around her was silent, except for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The stranger had led her far from the Darnell's house, deeper into the unknown, but now they were resting in a small, quiet village. They were safe for the moment, but Lila's heart felt heavy. The night had stretched on for what seemed like forever, and she still didn't know what to do. She lay on the hard ground, staring up at the star-filled sky. The cool air nipped at her skin, but the discomfort was nothing compared to the storm swirling in her mind. She had left everything behind: the bed, the cold rooms, the people who had used her. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she had made a mistake. Could she really leave everything? Was it really possible to escape? And what would happen to her now? The stranger had said he could help her, that he could show her what freedom felt like, but Lila didn't know if she was ready. She had spent so long in the dark, in a life of coldness and silence, that the thought of something better felt almost impossible. Could someone like her, someone who had been used for so long, ever really be free? The thought of going back to the Darnells, of returning to the life she knew, felt suffocating. The bed, the cold, the loneliness. It was all she had ever known. But was that enough? Was she just supposed to accept it? Or could she really take this chance? Lila's mind wandered back to the time before the Darnells had bought her, before she had been sold into servitude. She remembered her parents, their faces distant and cold, their voices always tinged with desperation. She had always been a burden to them, a responsibility they couldn't bear. They had sold her to survive, to escape their own misery, and, in the process, they had condemned her to a life of pain. Now here she was, free, but uncertain. Could she really build a life for herself? Could she leave behind everything she knew and trust a stranger? The idea seemed impossible. Everything she had ever been taught told her to stay, to accept her fate. But the stranger had given her a choice to be something more, to have a future that wasn't controlled by the whims of others. The soft sounds of the night seemed to grow louder as Lila turned over on the ground, trying to shake the thoughts from her mind. She could hear the distant murmur of the stranger, speaking to someone in the village, probably trying to find a place for them to rest. She couldn't understand why he was doing this for her. He had no reason to care about someone like her. People like him, they didn't get involved with people like her. It just didn't happen, and yet here he was, offering her a chance at something better. Lila sat up slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to believe in the stranger. She wanted to believe that there was something better out there for her. But was she strong enough to leave everything behind? The Darnells, the life she had known. It had been cruel, but it was safe. She knew it. She understood it. The fear of the unknown was terrifying, but then something inside her shifted. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A quiet, steady voice in the back of her mind that told her she was more than the life she had been given. She wasn't just a bed warmer. She was a person, a human being with thoughts, dreams, and desires. She deserved more than this. She deserved a chance at happiness, at freedom. Lila stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. The ground felt solid under her feet, but her heart was still uncertain. The decision she faced was one of the hardest she had ever had to make, but it was also the most important. She turned toward the stranger, who was still talking in the distance. His words were muffled, but she could hear the kindness in his tone. He had given her something she had never had before. Hope. Lila? The stranger's voice called out from behind her. She hadn't realized he was standing so close. Lila turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know what to do, she admitted quietly. I've never been free. I don't know if I can leave everything behind. The stranger took a step forward, his eyes filled with understanding. I know it's not easy, he said softly. It's scary. I get that. But sometimes the hardest part is making the choice to go forward, to take that first step. And you don't have to do it alone. Lila's mind was still a whirl of confusion. She didn't know if she was strong enough to leave, to trust him, to step into the unknown. But as she looked at him, she realized something. The stranger wasn't asking her to take this journey alone. He was there for her, offering her something she had never known before: support, care, and a way out of the darkness. Lila took a deep breath. I want to try, she said, her voice steady now, though it still trembled with uncertainty. I want to see what life is like without being owned. I want to see what freedom feels like. The stranger smiled, his eyes softening. Then we'll do it together. As Lila stood there looking out at the night ahead, she realized that the choice she had made wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about creating a future. She was ready even if she wasn't sure how it would unfold. The first step was the hardest, but it was the one that would lead her to the life she had always dreamed of, even if she didn't know what that life would look like. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when Lila made her first real choice. She had spent the entire night thinking, wrestling with her fears and questioning her every decision. But now, as the soft light spread across the village, she realized something. She was no longer the person she had been. She wasn't just a tool, a bed warmer to be used and discarded. She was free, or at least she was about to be. The stranger, who had promised to help her, was standing by the edge of the village, his back to her, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sight of him made Lila's heart beat faster. He wasn't like anyone she had ever known. He wasn't cruel. He didn't see her as a thing to be controlled. For the first time in her life, someone treated her like she mattered. She walked toward him, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had left the Darnells' house, the place that had been her prison for so long. It was terrifying to think about what she had done, about what might happen next. She had no idea where they were going, no idea what kind of life awaited her. But she had made the choice. She had taken that first step, and she wasn't going to look back. The stranger turned as she approached, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "Ready to go?" he asked. Lila nodded, though she wasn't sure if ready was the right word. "I think so," she said softly. They set off together, walking down the narrow path that led away from the village. Lila's eyes flicked nervously, over her shoulder, half expecting someone to appear from the shadows and drag her back to the life she had just escaped. But no one followed. The village, and the life she had known, slowly faded from view. As they walked, the stranger didn't say much, but his presence was a comfort. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't demanding anything of her. He was just there, quietly offering his support. It was a strange feeling for Lila, this sense of calm, of trust. She had always been told what to do, always been forced to follow orders, but now for the first time she was walking at her own pace, making her own decisions. After a few hours, they reached the outskirts of a dense forest. The trees were tall and thick, casting long shadows across the ground. The air felt cooler here, the scent of pine and earth filling Lila's senses. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the stranger. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small, unsure. The stranger smiled again. "Somewhere safe. I know a place where you can rest, where you don't have to worry about being found. We'll stay there for a while, and then we'll figure out what comes next." Lila nodded, though the doubt still lingered in her chest. She wasn't sure if this was the right decision, but she knew one thing. It was the only decision that mattered. She couldn't go back to her old life. She couldn't go back to being used, to being invisible. This was her chance to create something new, to have a life of her own. As they walked deeper into the forest, the world seemed to grow quieter. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional bird call in the distance. Lila felt like she was in a different world altogether, a place where no one knew her name, no one knew her past. It was both freeing and terrifying. "I've never been outside the house for long," Lila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been on my own like this." The stranger looked over at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know, it's scary, but you're not alone anymore. I'm here to help you." Lila swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. She had been so alone for so long. The thought of being alone again was unbearable. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. She had someone who cared. She had someone who saw her as more than just an object to be used. They walked for hours, stopping only when necessary to rest. The sun was high in the sky when they finally reached the small clearing where they would stay for the night. It was a peaceful spot, tucked away from the rest of the world. There was a small, simple cabin nestled among the trees, and a soft stream flowed nearby, its waters gentle and calming. The stranger led her inside the cabin, and Lila couldn't help but marvel at the simplicity of it. It was nothing like the grand, cold house she had known with the Darnells. There were no fancy beds, no wealth to be seen. Just a small, humble space. But for the first time, it felt like home. It felt real. "This is where we'll stay for a while," the stranger said, setting down his pack. "It's not much, but it's safe." Lila looked around, feeling a mixture of awe and disbelief. She was here. She was free. And it wasn't a dream. "What now?" she asked, her voice shaky with emotion. "Now we rest," the stranger said. "We take a moment to breathe, and then we figure out what comes next." Lila nodded, though the words felt heavy. She wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time, she realized it didn't matter. She had taken that first step toward freedom, and whatever came after, she would face it on her own terms. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the trees, Lila sat by the window, staring out at the world. The fear that had once gripped her heart was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something else, something new. Hope. A chance. A future. And for the first time in her life, Lila believed she could make it. The days in the small cabin passed slowly, each one a small victory for Lila. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to worry about being owned, being used, or being discarded. The stranger, who had introduced himself as Ryan, kept his word. He gave her the time and space she needed to adjust, to breathe, and slowly Lila began to feel like a person again. Each morning they would go out into the woods. They learned the area, gathering berries and mushrooms, staying close to the stream that ran through the clearing. Lila would gather firewood while Ryan showed her how to start a fire, how to survive in the wilderness, and how to trust herself. For once she felt safe, like she wasn't just surviving, but living. But no matter how peaceful the days were, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The quiet forest, the beautiful cabin, it all felt too perfect. Life, as she'd learned the hard way, rarely worked out that way. There was always something waiting in the shadows. One evening, as Lila sat outside by the fire, her mind wandered back to the Darnells. She wondered if they had noticed she was gone yet. The thought sent a chill through her. What if they came looking for her? What if the authorities got involved? Ryan's voice broke her thoughts. "Don't worry," he said, sitting down beside her. "They won't find you here. We're too far off the map for anyone to follow." Lila nodded, but her stomach tightened. What if they do? What if someone comes looking for me? Ryan looked at her with a solemn expression. "I won't let anyone take you back, I promise you that." Lila believed him, but the doubt lingered. The world she had left behind was powerful, and the Darnells were not the type to let someone go without a fight. That night, as they settled in for bed, the sounds of the forest outside felt eerily silent. No rustling of leaves, no chirping of birds, just an uncomfortable stillness. Lila had just closed her eyes when she heard a noise. It was faint at first, a crack of a twig breaking somewhere in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. Ryan was already awake, his eyes sharp and alert. He held up a hand to signal for silence. Slowly, he rose to his feet, moving silently towards the door. Lila's pulse quickened. The stillness of the night had unsettled her, and now it seemed that something, or someone, was out there, just beyond the trees. "Stay here," Ryan whispered as he opened the door just enough to slip outside. Lila didn't argue. She sat in the dim light, her thoughts racing. Could it be the Darnells? Could they have found her already? Minutes passed like hours. Lila could hear nothing but the pounding of her heart in her ears. She wanted to go outside, to see what was happening, but she didn't dare. Ryan had told her to stay put. He had promised to protect her. Finally, she heard Ryan's voice, soft but urgent, calling from outside the cabin. "Lila, come here." Lila's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She hurried outside, her bare feet crunching the leaves underfoot. She found Ryan standing by a tree, looking down at something on the ground. Lila's breath caught in her throat when she saw it. A footprint. Large, heavy, and unmistakably human. Ryan's face was grim. "They're close," he said. "Someone's been following us. They know we're here." Fear surged in Lila's chest, but she didn't speak. Her mind raced. Who would be following them? The Darnells. She had no idea how they could have found her, but she knew it wasn't a coincidence. Whoever was out there had been tracking them for days. "We need to move," Ryan said, his voice low but urgent. "Pack your things. We're leaving now." Lila nodded, her hands shaking as she grabbed what little she had. They had to leave. Now, the calm, peaceful days they had enjoyed in the forest felt like a distant memory. Danger was closer than ever. and the fear she had pushed away was now returning with a vengeance. As they hurried through the trees, the weight of the situation finally hit Lila. She had been running from her past, running from the Darnells, but the danger had followed her. It wasn't just the Darnells anymore. There was someone else out there. Someone who knew exactly where they were. But who? Rian kept glancing over his shoulder, his pace quickening as they moved deeper into the forest. Lila followed close behind, her thoughts spinning. What was happening? How had someone found them so quickly? She couldn't make sense of it. They reached a narrow trail that led toward a higher ridge where the trees thinned out, offering a better vantage point. From there they could see the valley below, a view that had once given Lila peace, but now it filled her with dread. In the distance, she could see lights flickering, the faint glow of a campfire. Or was it a search party? Ryan's eyes narrowed. "They're out there. We can't go back to the cabin. We need to find a new place to hide." Lila's mind reeled. Who was chasing them? What did they want? And why were they so determined to find her? There were too many questions, too many unknowns. She could feel her pulse racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The life she had fought so hard to escape was closing in on her again. "Who are they?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rian's jaw tightened. He looked down at the ground, clearly wrestling with something. "They're not the Darnells?" Lila's heart stopped. "Then who?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out over the ridge, the shadows of the trees stretching long in the growing darkness. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly, though the uncertainty in his voice wasn't lost on her. "But for now, we need to keep moving." The tension in the air was thick, heavier than the shadows that stretched across the forest floor. Lila's heart pounded as she followed Rian through the dense woods. The night seemed endless, but the threat of being found pressed harder with every passing moment. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her stomach twist in fear. The unknown pursuers, whoever they were still out there. Lila had never imagined that after everything she'd endured, the one thing she'd be running from now was the very freedom she'd fought so hard to claim. But Ryan had kept his word. He'd kept her safe so far, and now they were headed into uncharted territory, trying to find the answers they both desperately needed. They moved fast but quietly, slipping through the trees like shadows. The faint glow of distant lanterns told them they were getting closer, to the ridge, and from there, the world would open up before them. Ryan's face was etched with determination, but there was a dark, guarded look in his eyes, a look that Lila couldn't quite read. "We need to get higher," Ryan whispered. "We'll have a better view from the top." Lila nodded, though she didn't fully understand why they were moving this way. The dread she felt was starting to give way to confusion. Every step they took, the more questions piled up. Who were these people after them? What did they want with her? But Rian had remained tight-lipped. He hadn't shared the full story about why they were being pursued, only that they couldn't stop, that they couldn't turn back. At the top of the ridge they found a clearing, the trees parting to reveal the moonlit valley below. They paused for a moment, catching their breath. The air was cool, and the stars above were like pinpricks in the night sky, but Lila felt no peace from the view. Her eyes scanned the land below, searching for any sign of movement. "Do you see them?" Lila asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rian stood still, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the valley. "No," he said, his voice hard. "But they're close." Lila's stomach twisted. "Who are they, Ryan?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "Why are they following us? What do they want with me?" Ryan turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers. There was something new in his eyes, something sharp and hard, like a storm waiting to break. He took a deep breath before answering. "They're not just anyone," he said quietly. "They're the people who had you before the Darnells. They're the ones who sold you." Lila froze, the words slamming into her like a blow to the chest. "What?" she gasped. "You mean I wasn't the first?" "No," Ryan replied, his voice low but steady. You were just one of many. They're part of a system, one that buys and sells humans like cattle. They've been watching you, tracking you because you escaped. And they don't like that. The truth hit her hard. All those years she had thought the Darnells were the worst of it, but now Ryan was telling her that she wasn't just a tool for them. She wasn't just a bed warmer for them. She had been a part of a much darker world, one she had never fully understood. The people after her weren't just her owners. They were part of a larger, dangerous network. And you, Lila's voice trailed off. Why are you helping me? Ryan hesitated, his eyes flickering with something Lila couldn't place. I was once part of their system too, he said, his voice softer now. I used to work for them. I was one of the ones who helped find people like you. But I couldn't do it anymore. When I saw you, when I saw the look in your eyes, I knew I had to help you. I couldn't let them do this to you. Lila's mind spun. She had been running from the Darnells, but now she was learning the truth. There was a larger system of human trafficking at play, one that stretched far beyond her understanding. The world she had escaped was even more terrifying than she had imagined. But Ryan had chosen to break away from it, to fight back against it. And for that she couldn't help but feel grateful. She wasn't alone. But now they're coming for us, Ryan continued, pulling her out of her thoughts. And they won't stop until they have you back. They want to make an example of you. Lila swallowed hard. What can we do? She asked, her voice shaking. What if they find us? We don't have a choice, Ryan said. We fight. Lila nodded, her chest tight with fear, but there was a flicker of something else inside her, a spark of strength, a willingness to stand and fight for what she had fought for all these years, freedom. As Ryan turned to lead the way deeper into the forest, Lila took a deep breath. The life she had fought to escape, her past, her pain, her torment, was catching up with her. But she wasn't that person anymore. She wasn't just a bed warmer anymore. She was something more. She had a future now, and it was hers to fight for. She didn't know what lay ahead. She didn't know how the story would end. But she knew one thing. She was ready to face it. The strangers who hunted her, who tried to break her, would learn soon enough that they couldn't own her anymore. Lila wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was free, and she would stay free no matter what it took.